CBS World News.
Attention, the peoples of the world. World War II is about to come to its official closing. We're on the Pacific Fleet flagship USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay for the signing of the surrender of Japan. 3 years, 8 months, and 25 days since the attack on Pearl Harbor. We are 3,700 miles from there, but we have come much further than that by way of the Central Pacific, New Guinea, the Marianas, and the Philippines. The Japanese delegation has just arrived. Military men in formal military uniform and dignitaries, civilian dignitaries in formal attire. Lined up before us are more officers and men with high-ranking stars and gold braid than has been assembled in this bay for many a long time. The deck of the Missouri stretches out before us. We're on the veranda deck. Its great guns are pointed skyward to allow more room for the Army, Navy, Marines, and the representatives of the nations who are here. The United States, of China, the United Kingdom, Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, Australia, Canada, France, Netherlands, and New Zealand. An interesting note here for a moment. The Navy and Marine personnel, former prisoners of war who are here for this surrender ceremony, are Commander A.L. Maher, who is a surviving officer of the USS Houston, a prisoner since May 6, 1942. Lieutenant J.W. Condit. He was a member of the Yorktown's Torpedo 5 Squadron, a prisoner since September 1943. First Lieutenant William F. Harris, a Marine from Corregidor, since August 4, 1943 in Japan. Machinist Mate Second Class L.C. Shaw of the Navy, a survivor of the USS Grenadier. Lieutenant General Jonathan Wainwright is here, he who surrendered at Corregidor and Bataan, and General Arthur Percival, who surrendered at Singapore. With General Wainwright are his staff. Brigadier General Louis Beebe, his Chief of Staff, Colonel John Frigger, one of his aides, Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Dooley, and his orderly, Sergeant Hubert Carroll. Planes have been flying overhead. The day is quite cloudy, a mist surrounding the mountains that come down to form Tokyo Bay. Before us here are flags. Oh, here comes the Supreme Commander of the Allied Forces, General of the Army, Douglas MacArthur, William Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz, and other dignitaries.
General MacArthur is now facing the microphones. He is about to start his speech, which explains the signing surrender and also for...
We are gathered here, representatives of the major warring powers, to conclude a solemn agreement whereby peace may be restored. As Supreme Commander for the Allied Powers, I announce it my firm purpose, in the tradition of the countries I represent, to proceed in the discharge of my responsibilities with justice and tolerance, while taking all necessary dispositions to ensure that the terms of surrender are fully, promptly, and faithfully complied with. I now invite the representatives of the Emperor of Japan and the Japanese government and the Japanese Imperial General Headquarters to sign the instrument of surrender at the places indicated.
Mr. Mamoru Shigemitsu, Foreign Minister of the Japanese government, is stepping forward now to sit down at the table and sign the instrument of surrender. Now we're waiting. The Foreign Office Assistant has prepared the papers. Here comes Mr. Shigemitsu, who had found something wrong with arrangements. General MacArthur is standing behind the microphones over which he just talked. He's waiting. Here comes Mr. Shigemitsu now. He's pulling up to the table, pulls the chair back, and he's about to sit down. He is studying the document carefully. Something about it doesn't like. He's having a little difficulty sitting down because of his wooden leg. He takes off his silver top hat, pulling off his gloves. He's wearing yellow gloves. His assistant is helping him prepare his papers. Mr. General MacArthur is looking around. He's annoyed by a little farce. He points to his Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Richard Sutherland, to go up and help Mr. Shigemitsu prepare everything. This is going a little slower than planned, and the general is possibly a little bit irked because he wanted this to be efficient and rapid in the American custom. General MacArthur is waiting. He's looking down on Mr. Shigemitsu. Mr. Shigemitsu looks at his watch for some reason. Here he is. He's trying to get some ink out of a pen holder which has no ink in it. The Japanese do not have any. Mr. Shigemitsu has some ink in his pen, and he's ready to sign the document. He's leaning over the paper now. This document is a huge thing. It measures about 1.5 feet long by 1 foot wide. It's printed up in beautiful bold type. We can almost read it from here. Mr. Shigemitsu is affixing his signature to the official surrender document, turning over the Japanese armed forces and committing the people of Japan to obey the orders of General MacArthur through the office of the Emperor. We have an imperial declaration here for us by which the Emperor commits himself, his government, his armed forces, and his people to obey all the instructions on this instrument of surrender. Mr. Shigemitsu has finished, and immediately behind him is General Yoshijiro Umetsu, Chief of Staff of the Japanese Army Headquarters. General Yoshijiro Umetsu, who will sign for the Japanese Army and all the Japanese armed forces as personal representative of the Emperor of Japan. General Yoshijiro Umetsu sits down. He's having no trouble with his fountain pen. In fact, he's in very much of a rush. He's sitting down and he's scribbling his name across the American document. He'll lean over in a second and scribble his name across the copy prepared for the Japanese. Mr. Shigemitsu was watching Japanese General Yoshijiro Umetsu sign, and he has a very stern, bearing look on his face. In fact, all the Japs' faces show strong muscular tenseness around the jaw. This ceremony is not at all pleasing to them, and yet at the same time I must say that the victors, the allies gathered here, the admirals, the generals, and those men, those correspondents who represent the newspapers and radios of the world, there isn't a man here who has any feeling of exultation. Everyone is glad it's over. General Sullivan is just turning around the document now because General MacArthur is next to sign. Both Japanese delegates have signed. They have officially committed themselves, the Emperor, the armed forces, and the people of Japan, to obey all the orders of General MacArthur as Supreme Commander to be issued through the office of the Emperor.
The Allied powers will now sign on behalf of all the nations at war with Japan. Will General Wainwright and General Percival step forward and accompany me while I sign?
General MacArthur is just sitting down, and Lieutenant General Jonathan Wainwright, Hero Commander of Bataan and Corregidor, and Lieutenant General Arthur Percival, the British commander at Singapore, have stepped up behind him right at the document table. General Wainwright is assisting General MacArthur to sit down. General MacArthur takes one of the two official pens from the table, and here's his hand, It has started the D. U. He's writing very deliberately. His hand is shaking. He's bothered by emotion. That is obvious. General MacArthur is bothered by emotion, but he is doing a magnificent job of carrying this thing out. He's writing his name now. There is his first name. Here it comes. He's turned around. He's talking to Wainwright for just a second. He's giving General Wainwright the pen that he has just signed the document with. He has given the first pen to Lieutenant General Jonathan Wainwright, the Hero Commander of Bataan and Corregidor. Now he is completing his signature on the two documents, and he turns the second pen. He used two pens. He turned the second pen over to Lieutenant General Arthur Percival, the commander of Singapore when the Japanese took that British base. At last, these two commanders who suffered such ignominious defeats out here because their allies were not ready, at last these two commanders see the final, ultimate victory of the powers they represent.
For the forces of the United States itself, Admiral Chester Nimitz signs. Behind Nimitz are the Third Fleet's Admiral Halsey and Admiral Sherman, famed amphibious commander. General Su Young Chang, Chief of Military Operations for the Chinese National Council, signs for China. Admiral Sir Bruce Fraser, Commander of the British Pacific Fleet for the United Kingdom.
The representative of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics will now sign.
Lieutenant General Kuzma Nikolaevich Dorovlenko. Lieutenant General Kuzma Nikolaevich Dorovlenko. And he is calling forward 2 men to flank him as honor men. 3 men, 4 men, sorry. No, 3 men, 3 men. 1 Navy, 1 Russian Air Force, and 1 Russian Army. And they are all huge men, absolutely stalwart, magnificent specimens. They're beautiful dark brown uniform with blue trousers. The blue trousers have red stripes on them. His cap bears the red tabs of the staff officer of the Russian government. He is now signing very rapidly, very efficiently. He's wasting not a second at the papers. He finds himself a little uncomfortable, so he picks up the chair and slides it around while he's sitting in it. He's now signing the other side of the instrument of surrender, which commits all of Japan to the orders of General MacArthur. General Dorovlenko of the Russian, representing the Russian government, representing Marshal Joseph Stalin and the Russian people, is signing now on the surrender document. He has signed the American copy. He's now signing the Japanese copy. He has finished. He rises, salutes General MacArthur. General MacArthur smiles, nods approval at him, and turns back to the microphone.
The representative of Australia will now sign.
Sir Thomas Blamey, Commander-in-Chief of all the ground forces in the Southwest Pacific area when General MacArthur was Supreme Commander down there, and Commander-in-Chief of all Australian forces, has stepped forward and saluted General MacArthur. He then has called forward for honor guards to flank him, a member of the Australian ground forces, a member of the Australian Navy, a member of the Australian Air Forces, and a member of the Australian Home Defense Command. General Blamey has sat down. He's a large man. His chest is covered with decorations. He again is wearing the red tabs on his cap, which designate a senior staff officer of the British Army. He's wasting no time in signing the documents. He reverses the procedure. He signs this time the Japanese document first and the American document second. Doesn't make much difference. The thing is all getting very formal, and down on paper, this horrible world is about to finally officially come to a close. General Sir Thomas Blamey has finished signing. He again salutes MacArthur, receives a salute in return, and back to General MacArthur.
Representative of Canada will now sign.
Colonel L. Moore Cosgrove. Colonel L. Moore Cosgrove, representing the Dominion of Canada. He is alone. He is alone. He steps up to the table, salutes General MacArthur, wastes not a second, picks up a pen, and affixes his signature. We're still waiting here for the show of air strength, which was scheduled for this morning. It was to be a shared job by Navy carrier planes and General Spotz's Strategic Air Forces. However, the weather, as I said, is very bad, and it's particularly bad around the shores of the bay, where there are a number of mountains that disappear at very sudden approaches into the cloud level that is not very high. The ship we're on, the Missouri, is absolutely surrounded by a terrific armada of American and British fighting strength. Just off our port bow are 2 British battleships, King George V and Howe. Just to the right of us are 2 American battleships. And back to General MacArthur.
The representative of France will now sign.
General Jacques Leclerc, hero of the Chad, hero of France, is stepping up to the table now to sign, and he calls 2 of his staff officers up to stand behind him as honor guard. He has saluted General MacArthur. He sits down and picks out his own fountain pen to sign the document. He is wasting not a second and affixing his scent. General Jacques Leclerc, the man who led the handful task force from the Chad all the way up through the desert to Libya to team up with General Montgomery and come on through to Tunisia to join General Eisenhower's forces, then into Italy, then into France, finally into Germany, and here he is saluting MacArthur. He has signed the document.
The representative of Netherlands will now sign.
Admiral Conrad Helfrich. Admiral Conrad Helfrich, representing the Netherlands, the man who commanded the Allied fleet in the Java Sea battle way back in 1942 when the Allies had so little and the enemy had so much. Admiral Helfrich is now fixing his signature. General MacArthur is giving him a hand here. There's a little hitch about the pen, and the general's gone up to lend him a hand, and Admiral Helfrich is now affixing his signature. It was Admiral Helfrich who decided that Allied power that was available in the Pacific, in the Java area, in the Netherlands East Indies area, would fight rather than wait for the Japs to attack. And he sent forth the Allied Naval Task Force to the Battle of the Java Sea, where America lost the Houston, where Britain lost the Exeter, and where Admiral Helfrich lost what was left of the Dutch Navy with the exception of 2 light cruisers. However, that battle delayed the Japanese. It enabled us to pull a number of key personnel and a lot of air strength out of Java back to Australia, and every bit in that time, every bit saved in that time, helped save the entire democratic world. Admiral Helfrich salutes MacArthur. Back
of New Zealand.
Will now
now sign.
Air Vice Marshal, I just finished his signature. He turns and salutes gentlemen guard with all nod. Back to MacArthur.
Let us pray that peace be now restored to the world, and that God will preserve it always. These proceedings are closed. And so now we have peace in the world. Symbolically, during the latter part of the signing of the document by the representatives of these allied nations, the sun, which had been behind the clouds here at Tokyo Bay during the early morning, up to almost the very end of the signing, came through the clouds and we had sunshine. And it shone down on the assembled might of the vast allied fleets here in this broad stretch of water. Old Mount Fujiyama, which has seen many strange things in this strange land, has looked down now upon one of the most momentous surrenders in all the history of the world. Perhaps, and let us hope that this is the last surrender. I should like to point to you that the first American flag ever to fly over Japanese soil 92 years ago, and the flag that flew over the Capitol in Washington when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, both are being displayed here today. Two historic flags, one with only 31 stars and one with 48. The great battleship Missouri now stands with its prow pointing toward Japan. Its guns are lifted high. Everyone here has felt a great feeling of exultation. It's been a great event. It's one that could not help but stir you right down to the soles of your shoes. The Allied General Staffs are standing by. The Japanese are preparing to depart. Soldiers, sailors, Marines, civilians, war correspondents, men who follow this war across the Pacific and up through the jungles of New Guinea and the Philippines and on the rough, bloody beach at Tarawa and up through Iwo Jima sands and Okinawa and up here to Japan itself. Many of these men are here, the sun showing now on their bronze faces as they look upon this scene. It's interesting to watch the color of the representatives of the Allied nations, some with scarlet bands about their caps, the French with gold braid twisted and braided around the top of there. A great many caps in white as the Navy is represented, the sky, the royal blue of the New Zealanders, and the dark blue of the British, and the khaki, the informal khaki of the representatives of the United States Fleet and of the United States Army. There are many men here, if I have a moment, and I do have because the Japanese have not gone. I should like to point that General Joseph Stilwell is over there, the 10th Army, and General Walter Kruger of the 6th, and General Courtney Hodges of the 1st Army, who now we can say is here in the Pacific, and General Carl Toohey Spotts of the Strategic Air Force, and General Kenny of the Far Eastern Air Force, and Lieutenant General Robert L. Eichelbarger of the 8th Army, and Lieutenant General Robert C. Richardson of the Pacific, and Lieutenant General Richard Sutherland, Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General William Steyer, Lieutenant General Barney Giles, and of the Navy, Admiral Halsey, Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner, of whom you've heard earlier, Vice Admiral John Towers, Vice Admiral John McCain of the carriers, Vice Admiral Charles Lockwood, and Vice Admiral Theodore Wilkinson, Vice Admiral Forrest Sherman, Lieutenant General Roy Geiger of the Marines, Admiral John F. Shafroth, and Donald B. Berry, Rear Admiral. All these and many more with their staffs with them. And now, from the Pacific,
Ladies and gentlemen of the world, as if God himself approves, the clouds have broken away, the sun has come out in these first moments of peace. The Japanese are now leaving with a surrender document, and from aboard the flagship USS Missouri, where the formal surrender of Japan has just taken place, we switch you now to the White House in Washington.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
My fellow Americans, Supreme Allied Commander General MacArthur, and Allied representatives on the battleship Missouri in Tokyo Bay. The thoughts and hopes of all America, indeed of all the civilized world, are centered tonight on the battleship Missouri. There, on that small piece of American soil, anchored in Tokyo Harbor, the Japanese have just officially laid down their arms. They have signed terms of unconditional surrender. 4 years ago, the thoughts and fears of the whole civilized world were centered on another piece of American soil, Pearl Harbor. The mighty threat to civilization which began there is now laid at rest. It was a long road to Tokyo and a bloody one. We shall not forget Pearl Harbor. The Japanese militarists will not forget the USS Missouri. The evil done by the Japanese warlords can never be repaired or forgotten. But their power to destroy and kill has been taken from them. Their armies, and what is left of their navy, are now impotent. To all of us, there comes first a sense of gratitude to Almighty God, who sustained us and our allies in the dark days of grave danger, who made us to grow from weakness into the strongest fighting force in history, and who has now seen us overcome the forces of tyranny that sought to destroy his civilization. God grant that in our pride of this hour we may not forget the hard tasks that are still before us, that we may approach these with the same courage, zeal, and patience with which we faced the trials and problems of the past 4 years. Our first thoughts, of course, thoughts of gratefulness and deep obligation, go out to those of our loved ones who have been killed or maimed in this terrible war. On land and sea and in the air, American men and women have given their lives so that this day of ultimate victory might come and assure the survival of a civilized world. No victory can make good their loss. We think of those whom death in this war has hurt, taking from them fathers, husbands, sons, brothers, and sisters whom they loved. No victory can bring back the faces they long to see. Only the knowledge that the victory which these sacrifices have made possible will be wisely used can give them any comfort. It is our responsibility, ours the living, to see to it that this victory shall be a monument worthy of the dead who died to win it. We think of all the millions of men and women in our armed forces and merchant marines all over the world who, after years of sacrifice and hardship and peril, have been spared by providence from harm. We think of all the men and women and children who during these years have carried on at home in lonesomeness and anxiety and fear. Our thoughts go out to the millions of American workers and businessmen, to our farmers and miners, to all those who have built up this country's fighting strength and who have shipped to our allies the means to resist and overcome the enemy. Our thoughts go out to our civil servants and to the thousands of Americans who, at personal sacrifice, have come to serve in our government during these trying years. To the members of the Selective Service Board and Ration Board, to the civilian defense and Red Cross workers, to the men and women in the USO and in the entertainment world, to all those who have helped in this cooperative struggle to preserve liberty and decency in the world. We think of our departed gallant leader, Franklin D. Roosevelt, defender of democracy, architect of world peace and cooperation. And our thoughts go out to our gallant allies in this war, to those who resisted the invaders, to those who were not strong enough to hold out, but who, nevertheless, kept the fires of resistance alive within the souls of their people, to those who stood up against great odds and held the line until the United Nations together were able to supply the arms and the men with which to overcome the forces of evil. This is a victory of more than arms alone. This is a victory of liberty over tyranny. From our war plants rolled the tanks and planes which blasted their way to the heart of our enemy. From our shipyards sprang the ships which bridged all the oceans of the world for our weapons and supplies. From our farms came the food and fiber for our armies and navies and for our allies in all the corners of the earth. From our mines and factories came the raw materials and the finished products, which gave us the equipment to overcome our enemies. But back of it all were the will and spirit and determination of a free people who know what freedom is and who know that it is worth whatever price they had to pay to preserve it. It was the spirit of liberty which gave us our armed strength and which made our men invincible in battle. We now know that that spirit of liberty, the freedom of the individual, and the personal dignity of man are the strongest and toughest and most enduring forces in all the world. And so on VJ Day, we take renewed faith and pride in our own way of life. We have had our day of rejoicing over this victory. We have had our day of prayer and devotion. Now let us set aside VJ Day as one of renewed consecration to the principles which have made us the strongest nation on earth and which, in this war, we have striven so mightily to preserve. Those principles provide the faith, the hope, and the opportunity which help men to improve themselves and their lot. Liberty does not make all men perfect, nor all society secure, but it has provided more solid progress and happiness and decency for more people than any other philosophy of government in history. And this day has shown again that it provides the greatest strength and the greatest power which man has ever reached. We know that under it we can meet the hard problems of peace which have come upon us. A free people with free allies who can develop an atomic bomb can use the same skill and energy and determination to overcome all the difficulties ahead. Victory always has its burdens and its responsibilities as well as its rejoicing. But we face the future and all its dangers with great confidence and great hope. America can build for itself a future of employment and security. Together with the United Nations, it can build a world of peace founded on justice, fair dealing, and tolerance. As President of the United States, I proclaim Sunday, September the 2nd, 1945, to be VJ Day, the day of the formal surrender of Japan. It is not yet the day for the formal proclamation of the end of the war, nor of the cessation of hostilities, but it is a day which we Americans shall always remember as a day of retribution, as we remember that other day, the day of infamy. From this day we move forward. We move toward a new era of security at home. With the other United Nations, we move toward a new and better world of cooperation, of peace, and international goodwill. God's help has brought us to this day of victory. With His help, we will attain that peace and prosperity for ourselves and all the world in the years ahead.